This is a video I did not intend to make. When I set out on the journey to look at the good and bad and ugly of every main edition of D&D, being OE all the way up to 5e, I didn't intend to include the basic expert BECMI kind of stuff in here, but you guys asked. I got so many comments and I got the really clear message that I should cover everything here. So that's what we're going to do today. Please do remember to subscribe. Over 96% of you who watch my videos are not subscribed, and subscribing is a free and easy way for you to show your support if this is something that you're into. Additionally, if you stick around to the end of the video, I have a surprise towards the end, sort of a freebie or a bonus to that I'm including here. So I know I harp on about OD&D a lot, but when it comes to talking about the editions of D&D, it's very hard to escape original Dungeons and Dragons, and particularly in today's video it's important because really what we're talking about is that sort of bifurcation of where original Dungeons and Dragons forks off. So on the one hand we have Gary Gygax developing what becomes advanced D&D, and you know, these two share a lineage. You can see that clear progression between the two of these, but on the other hand, we see this move towards something simpler. TSR recognizes that there needs to be something for players that might be a little bit easier to get into. One of the things that is notable about these and where this kind of change happens is really around a very simple reading, I suppose, of the white box. And where we see some of this division starting is really with the reading and the interpretation of what we now think of as classes. And for instance, we have dwarves. So I've used this example before, but dwarves may opt only for the fighting class and they may never progress beyond 6th level. And then we have also something that's pretty odd and curious and can be hard to get your head around: elves. So elves can begin as fighting men or magic users and freely switch classes whenever they choose from adventure to adventure, but not during the course of a single game. They thus gain the benefits of both classes and may use weaponry and spells. They may use magic armor and still act as magic users. However, they may not progress beyond the 4th level of fighting man or hero, nor 8th level of magic user. So what's interesting about this is, on the one hand, we have AD&D, which sort of moves into the separation of class and race. You could create an elf who is a fighter and a magic user. And then on the other hand, we get the basic line, which combines class and race. So in other words, you play an elf who has fighting and magic using abilities, or you play, say, a dwarf, which is inherently a fighting character. So really, we see this interpretation, these differences in interpretation carry across in the main kind of line of Dungeons & Dragons from 1st edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and then this evolves over time, and eventually these two kind of coalesce again, ironically, into 3rd edition. So naturally, this brings us to the first basic set. So this is the basic set, Dungeons & Dragons. It has an introductory module. This, I believe, is a later printing, probably the late 70s. And I just want to say that this video would not be possible without the help of my pal Chris. So Chris has kindly lent me some of the stuff for this video. Okay, so in 1977, John Eric Holmes, who was a professor of neurology at Southern California School of Medicine, approaches TSR and says, hey, you know, I've been playing this game, I've been really enjoying it, I've been running games, but I think the rules are a little bit complicated and I'd love to kind of write a revision for you. And so TSR, I guess Gary Gygax must have approved it as well, I can't remember, but anyway, the effect of it is TSR as a company pays him to create this version of the game. So it's his interpretation, I guess, of OD&D. You know, and it was approved by TSR, so I think they were fine with his sort of reading of the OD&D rules. Initially, people were sort of complaining about OD&D being difficult to understand, and I really do understand that. So what's interesting about this particular set was it came with 2 different versions. So what we have here is the main booklet, and in 1979 they were doing these chits instead of dice, so they actually had a production issue with some of the dice. In initial publications it came with B1, and then later on it came with B2. So I think these all go together. But earlier on, Holmes actually came with In Search of the Unknown. So this was an introductory module that also shipped with Holmes. So this was kind of the original cover, and then they changed it, TSR changed it to this cover a little bit later. So if you have Holmes, it's possible that you have B2, it's possible that you have B1 with this cover, and it's also possible that you have B1 with this cover. It's also possible that, I think it shipped with like Dungeon Geomorphs and some other random supplements. So it was in a way, it was quite a hodgepodge of different supplements and things, but one of the consistencies was this blue booklet here. So yeah, it's this kind of blue cover. The artwork is very sort of similar to AD&D, like the similar artists, and just kind of a similar style overall. So what is the good of Holmes Basic D&D? So firstly, this was a much easier rule set to understand. It was more self-contained than OD&D in the sense it was all in one booklet. It amalgamated the Greyhawk, some of the Greyhawk supplementary material with the Thief class, as well as the plain white box stuff. The layout was much more straightforward, and it really does sort of retain this old school spirit while making it much easier to access for newcomers. You'll notice too that characters only go up to level 3, so this was very much seen as an introductory system, and then readers are actually referred to advanced Dungeons and Dragons if they want to go beyond this. So see here it says there are a number of other character types which are detailed in advanced Dungeons and Dragons. There are subclasses of 4 basic classes, and it outlines all of this. One of the things I really like about Holmes is it has a very distinct identity. You can immediately look at that sort of blue tinged booklet and know exactly what it is. It still feels like OD&D, which I really like. It still really does retain that original spirit. It has an identity. To me, it also captures the archetypes of D&D, the fighter, the magic user, the cleric, the thief, and really in here you get some of those main core D&D experiences that show up in OD&D and sort of persist right through to the present. But it's all found in this one little self-contained rule set. One of the downsides of Holmes was it only does go to level 3. So, which is a little bit strange. It is quite limited in scope. However, my understanding was that John Eric Holmes only really did low levels. I don't know whether this is true or not, but it's just something I've read that he tended to just play with lower levels anyway. And I'd to be kind of not too harsh on this, I would sort of make the argument that you could have a lot of fun just with this, with the first 3 levels, just playing around. So yeah, it is limiting, only goes up to level 1 to 3. That is probably a con for most people. Similarly, it's quite limited in terms of options. The classes that you're picking are fixed. There's not a lot of power to them compared with, say, later editions. So, arguably it could be a little bit bland. I think it's still in the space of OD&D where it's kind of inviting you to tweak things, and it gives sort of suggestions for for doing different things with the rules. And so I think it retains some of that OD&D spirit. So probably what I suspect is that people who played this edition were probably fairly comfortable with just making new things up. You can maybe making up new classes or, kind of experimenting with the rules. But, it is limited certainly in options compared with what we would think of today. Another thing that was kind of strange about it is for something that's introducing people to the game, it doesn't really introduce people properly to the main game, which was coming out at the time, which was AD&D. So if you recall from my first video, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the Monster Manual comes out in 1977. This also comes out in 1977. So probably, as you've read in there's a little paragraph about Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know if Holmes himself wrote that or if that was added by a TSR employee, but they had some inkling of what was going on, with the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons game. And so this kind of lack of compatibility is a little bit odd. Now, you can take this criticism a little bit loosely because the monsters are very compatible. While the classes might be a little bit different, I would say, it is actually fairly close. You can use the same monsters, and I would even say that you could make a character in Holmes and play with an AD&D class, and it's probably not going to be an AD&D character, and it's probably not going to be wildly different. I could say much more about this, but in the spirit of keeping the video on the shorter side, I just want to say I like this particular version of BASIC, and let's move on. It's 1981, a mere 3 years after Holmes comes out. It's seen fit to do a revision of the BASIC rules. So again, we see this here. This is Tom Moldvay's revision of the game, and Tom Moldvay wrote a lot of adventures, and he was, fairly kind of, I guess, a well-known employee of TSR. Quite excitingly for people who are playing around this time, not only was this revised, but it was also added to with this expert set. So the expert set was written by David Cook, who went on to do 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, alongside Steve Marsh. So these two here are kind of what we call BX, or sometimes people call it, like Moldvay Cook. What was interesting about this is it really did improve accessibility to the game further. It made things a lot easier to grasp. The rules were laid out a lot cleaner even than Holmes. And it came with a solid introductory adventure that a lot of people enjoyed getting started with. This one was by Gary Gygax, Keep on the Borderlands. And this is, again, like the Holmes one, this is a very iconic module that probably a lot of people got their start playing the game with. Another good thing about BX was that it expanded beyond 3rd level. So now players could get their characters all the way up to level 14, which by the sort of the framework of this game was pretty high level, and really is kind of a sweet spot as far as I'm concerned. You have good character development, the rules are solid, the level range, in my opinion, is pretty much perfect. And again, it just really retains that quintessential D&D experience. And as you can see, the graphic design was really polished even in that 3-year period. It begins to look a lot more modern. It still really retains that old school flavor, but it's just done in kind of a much more sort of friendly and approachable way. The tables are kind of in more sensible places. There's more of a kind of a continuing narrative around how to make characters. It's very, like, the font is very legible. There's like nice spacing. Just generally, I think for a child reading this, which is what the intended audience of this was for, I think it would have just been a much easier way to get into the game. You've got these like nice clean illustrations, and to me the graphic design was just pretty well done for this particular publication. In the expert set you get something similar, although this one came with the adventure The Isle of Dread. And so you get these two kind of quite complementary adventures. You get B2, which kind of has this outdoor wilderness thing, and then you have X1, which is more about, kind of exploring this dreadful island. And then in terms of the layout of this, it's kind of this nice mirroring where you have the basic cover art here, and then there's this wizard almost kind of scrying on them. But again, the layout is very kind of similar. It just really picks up where BASIC leaves off, and at this stage you're kind of getting these characters that are much more. The scope of it is, aimed for high level play. I haven't had a ton of games, especially old school games, that have gone beyond 10th or 11th level. I mean, I think 14th level is totally adequate, and your characters are getting pretty powerful by the time you get up to 14th level. So for me, this really is like a sweet spot of BASIC. Personally, and I'm biased, obviously, but this is my sort of favorite version of the BASIC Expert series. Now, what is the bad of BX or Moldvay Cook? Well, it feels a little bit more codified than Holmes, and it really moved, at this stage, it really has moved to, I think, a separate space from OD&D. It still has a similar kind of do-it-yourself thing, and it does talk about that, to some extent, but really this has become quite codified to the point of it being, very clear rules, and this is kind of how you play. And I'm sure there's still a lot of house ruling and switching of rules that took place for a lot of people, and I'm sure you'll tell me about it in the comments if that was you. But to me, there is a much higher level of rules clarity here, which does take it a little bit away from that OD&D space where things were purposefully encouraged to be left up to the ref or the DM. Another sort of potentially bad thing about Basic Expert is that you do have the rules split across 2 rulebooks. So sometimes it can be a little bit confusing finding what you want between the 2. Is it in Basic? Is it in Expert? You might look at Expert thinking it's in there and find out that it's in Basic, and vice versa. So that gets a little bit fiddly sometimes if you're playing. As a preference, you might want the rules in one place. Another potentially bad thing is just from a modern perspective, it does have descending armor class. It does have some of those things that people might find a little clunky by today's standards. Honestly though, other than that, I can't really fault BX too much. Like, this is a great system. I've run it before. I've had a lot of enjoyment and joy playing this particular version of the game. It's hard to fault. I think this would be a great entry point if you're looking to go old school. Even more hurried was the move from Moldvay Cook to Frank Mentzer's edition of the basic rules. Only 2 years after this, in '83, Frank Mentzer is charged with revising the rules yet again. This time, though, we're given a veritable suite of options. So not only do we have the now expected Expert Rules Set 2, but we also have the Companion Rules, and we also have the Master Rules, and we also have the Immortals. What Frank Mentzer's version really did and really took pains to do was really spell out the role-playing experience for new players. Read this book first, okay, cool, and then you pretty much get straight into it with this sort of adventure, and you can kind of play along to these rules. So, if the bar to entry became much lower with BX, with BECMI, Basic, Expert, Companion, Master, and Immortals, you really get this simplified even further, and yeah, you're literally walking new players right through the process of making a character. With so many different box sets, you get a much more expansive version of the rules. So in the previous basic sets, we have levels 1 to 3 covered in the basic rules. We have level 4 to 14 covered in the expert set, same as Moldvay. In the companion rules, we have level 15 to 25 covered. In the master rules, we have level 26 to 36 covered. And finally, in the immortal rules, we have level 36 onwards. And really, we're just talking about gods at this stage. So the game can really grow with you. You can start out at level 1 and get to level 3. You can start to take that journey further with the expert rules where your characters, level up and get up to that sort of 14th level. If you're still playing the game, you can start to throw in some companion rules and take your characters to like a pretty epic sort of place. And then to cap it off, you've got this like superhero sort of situation with the master rules where really these characters are just getting to the stage of almost being invincible. They don't sort of, I think as Frank Mentzer says in one of the introductions, they're not fearing them for their mortality anymore. And then finally they get it going literally between worlds with this immortals thing. They've kind of ascended to a level of godhood. So the game, one of the good things is that the game could really grow with you and your group of players. The rules became much more kind of in depth, and really what you're starting to look at once you throw all those rules in is something that's much more akin to AD&D, but as I said, with that different kind of race as class structure where you're playing a dwarf who is a fighter, but it's just called a dwarf. You're playing an elf who is a magic user and a fighter, but it's just called an elf, and so forth. So what this meant was that this was a really solid alternative to AD&D. What about the bad and the ugly for BECMI? Well, I know this is a very beloved edition for a lot of people, but I do have to say that it's kind of clunky carrying this many boxes around and using rules from each of these different boxes. And again, if you had that sort of trouble with basic and expert going what rules where, I imagine you're having much more trouble with all of these rules spread out between the boxes. In each box, as you get into sort of companion, master, and immortals, typically you're getting 2 booklets per book. So you're getting one for the players, which has players options, and you're getting one for the dungeon master. Same thing in the master rules, you're getting the DM's book, you're getting the player's book. Immortals, the same thing, you're getting a DM's guide to immortals and a player's guide to immortals. And so across this whole line, like if you're adding all of this up, you've got, kind of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 different rule books that you're potentially trying to reference. I'd love to hear people's experiences with this, because I can imagine that could get pretty clunky. The next thing that I was kind of thinking about is, as you sort of hit this companion, master and immortals space, are those high levels really needed? I've never had a campaign that went to that sort of height. Like, I think that the highest I've ever had a campaign go was maybe to like 17th level. I don't think or maybe 20th, but certainly not beyond there. And so really, as you get into this sort of immortal space, I'm interested in sort of hearing about how many people got into this immortal space, or how many people got their characters into this master space. As a DM, were you giving out tons of XP to achieve this? How long did it take to get there? And so I guess you could question whether some of this was needed. I think it's good in the sense that it gives a ton of rules and a ton of options for players, but in kind of most scenarios, do you need 36 plus levels of options for characters? Similarly, there's a few rules in here that are a little bit, I don't know, just maybe even not necessary, just certain situational rules, siege stuff, or just random stuff that is quite circumstantial and may not come up overly often. And again, if you're having to go through different books to find stuff, that could be annoying, kind of wading through some of that material. Now, if you've stuck around this long in the video, I do have one more thing to offer. So in 1991, we're given the Rules Cyclopedia. This being put out in 1991 meant that this coincides with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition. And it is compiled or written by Aaron Alston. Now, this really is an interesting one, and for me kind of answers some of that just that disparate nature of the BECMI stuff, where you've got stuff all over the place. In this Rule Cyclopedia, what they did was they consolidated everything up to Master, the B to M, so Basic, Expert, Companion, and Master, so BECM. And this really is a bit of a tome. This really is rule for everything territory. This really goes into a lot of depth. The good of it is that it, as I said, it consolidates those other materials into something very manageable. You could have a couple of copies of this, even probably one, and get away with it just fine. And this is your rule set. This is what you're using at the table. And man, this is like definitely comparable to AD&D in terms of scope. You may not have as much option in the character creation part of it, but man, like it really does cover a lot of ground. It introduced 2 new classes in addition. It introduced the Druid and the Mystic. So there's the Druid there as an optional character. And then the second optional character was the Mystic. Right there. Which is kind of vaguely modeled off a monk in AD&D terms. Another benefit or good thing about this was, like its predecessor, the other parts of BECMI, this was easy to understand. It was very clearly written, quite accessible given the kind of the density of it. And as I said, it just makes kind of a good alternative to AD&D if you're so inclined. One of the additional things it did was outlined the world of Mystara, which some people are quite into. And so, provided a lot of content around Mystara, and it, provided these kind of hex maps, and went into a bit of detail about that as a campaign setting. So it had these maps kind of built into it and showed us, what the world looks like, the hollow world. In terms of the bad for this, the only things that I could really think of was that the sort of the very thing that makes it complete as a cyclopedia is kind of the thing that might be a little bit dry or dull. It's very complete, but it can be a little bit dense at times. And if you really compare it to where we started with our journey, which was original Dungeons & Dragons, there are some similarities, but by this point, this is just such a different game. It's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just something to consider. So if you've made it to the end of this video, and more broadly the end of this video series, I really appreciate you following me with this journey. It's been super fun, and as I said, I was not planning on doing the basic expert line. It was mainly just because I just don't have the stuff on my shelf, but at the same time, I think it was kind of fair in most cases where people sort of commented and said, hey, have you considered doing this? It would be great. Some people were a lot more blunt than others, but overall, I got the spirit of it. The fact that you guys wanted it covered and you wanted to see like a real complete journey through every edition. So I hope this basically satisfies it. There are a few outliers, like, there's been kind of some basic sets for 4th and 5th edition, and there was also a black box that was published, I think, around 93 or 94. But I think we can safely sort of wrap this video series up and say, yeah, we've covered most of the main, if not all of them, pretty damn close. And so hopefully you've gotten something from it. Hopefully you've learned something, or even if you haven't learned something, maybe it's just been nostalgic or it's been fun to listen to. So I appreciate the support. I appreciate you following along with this. And I'll catch you in the next one.